What is up, everyone? Today I'm going to chat to you about a newish hobby of mine, a kind of new interest that I've been really enjoying for about 10 months or so. And that is, as you can probably tell from the frame in front of you, that is Betamax videotapes. Now, before we go any further, let me just quickly touch on the pronunciation. From this point forward, I'm going to say Betamax. Now that is pretty much because in this country we do say beta in terms of alpha, gamma, beta, as opposed to beta. But also, as I've kind of been chatting to people about this format in particular, and chatting to people that I know in this country that lived through the Betamax versus VHS kind of battle in the 80s, in the late 70s and early 80s, most, if not all, of those people in this country say Betamax. So I'm not going to be the odd one out. I'm not going to be that Wally that speaks differently and adopts the sort of US way of saying it. So regardless of the fact that most of the YouTube videos about this format come from the US and everyone says Betamax on YouTube, I am going to stick to the roots of this this pronunciation and say Betamax. So that's just to combat any of the comments that come along about what I'm using in terms of pronunciation here. So let's get on to chatting about this format. Now, I've always wanted to get into it, right from when I kind of got into retro tech and suddenly realized that, okay, yes, I am really intrigued by some of these older things. I always wanted to try out Betamax, but something that holds you back is the fact that the VCRs themselves, the Betamax recorders, are extremely hard to find in this country. You can find them on eBay. In fact, there are quite a few units on eBay. The problem is they command a really high price, and you cannot guarantee if they're going to work or not. Now, last year, October the 1st, my birthday, I got from my parents my first Betamax VCR, which I'm going to make a video about very soon. I wanted to make this video as a sort of foundation to that video. So in that one, I'll really be getting my teeth stuck into my particular Betamax VCR, whereas this video is more of sort of an overview of this format in general. Now, I unwrapped my new Betamax VCR for my birthday, well, new to me, of course, not new in general, and I was absolutely blown away. It didn't work, of course, but my dad had found it out in the wild, and it was just amazing. Now, I thought at the time it would have been handy if it worked when I'd received it, but I'm really glad that it wasn't, because the journey that I took in order to get the machine fully restored introduced me to a gentleman who is extremely knowledgeable, and I'll talk about him in far greater detail in my actual VCR video that I make pretty soon. I think I'll do it in the next couple of weeks or so. It introduced me to him, and I've just had brilliant conversations with him via email for the last 10 months about this format, and it's really nice to speak to someone that knows what they're talking about. And he is a fantastic VCR repair genius. He fully restored my Betamax VCR. I got it back, and it plays back as if it was bought yesterday. So I love it, and that really inspired me to get my hands on some tapes. Now, I am not a collector. I do not consider myself a collector at all. I consider myself interested in this format, and I will pick up films that look interesting to me. I'll also pick up films that look extremely obscure, and I'll pick up films that are dirt cheap just for the hell of it. But I won't gather together loads and loads of titles. What you see in front of me here, or in front of you here rather, is probably about a third to maybe even a half of my collection. So I don't own that many tapes. It's kind of like a once in a blue moon treat, getting a tape and watching it, but that makes it all the more special. If I bought in, dozens and dozens of tapes, it would just lose that sort of special feeling. Right now I feel really sort of connected with my collection, and I know what most of the films are about. I've watched the majority of films. I've watched about 3/4 of the tapes that I've bought, and I know the condition of the tapes, and it just completes the experience. It really, really does, because there's nothing worse than being interested in collecting something but not actually utilising it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, hey, Betamax is my replacement for all of my late 70s, early 80s movie watching. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, this is an interesting format that I do enjoy watching films on from time to time. So in this particular video, we're going to talk about this as a general format. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, and we're going to talk about my experiences and why I like it, and a little bit of my own couple of stories from here and there, and I really hope you're all going to enjoy it. Now, before we get started, I'm just going to say this is obviously before my time. Betamax is a 70s, late 70s, early 80s format that was pretty much dead by the mid 80s in lots of people's eyes, and I was born away after that. So I didn't live through it. That's just kind of a little disclaimer. I'm obviously going to have people watching here that lived through it, but I'm enjoying this as kind of like a looking back kind of time machine approach, which is really cool because not all of us can experience formats that came out, and we especially can't experience them if we weren't even born. So I'm enjoying this as kind of like look back on a time that is now forgotten by a lot of people in terms of technology. So let's chat about Betamax. It's definitely going to be a long one, this, folks, but I hope you all enjoy. And as well, I've got quite a few young viewers, so I think the young viewers out there will find this interesting if you guys aren't that familiar with this sort of thing. So a tiny bit of history. One of the most interesting things about this format, in my opinion, is the fact that it is total proof that being first to market is not always the best thing, and it makes it a really, really interesting bit of history to look back on. VHS versus Betamax, one of the most sort of well-known format wars, pretty much the format war to talk about. Really, really interesting. And Sony brought Betamax to market a considerable amount of time before JVC brought out VHS to market. And VHS still managed to gain incredible ground for a few different reasons. We'll talk about those reasons a little bit in a second, but firstly a little bit about Betamax. It came out in 1975, I believe in the US. The first VCR in the US was a combination unit. I'll put the model number and a picture up on the screen at the moment, at this moment in time, sorry. It was a TV and a Betamax VCR in one, which was the original concept, I believe, for the whole shenanigans. It was the fact that you had dual tuners in that one box. It was a piece of furniture. It was a nice Sony Trinitron TV. It had the Betamax deck in it, and it was kind of like an all-in-one solution, which is so nice. And it reminds me a little bit of an Apple approach, especially because the design for the time was gorgeous. Still looks like a nice bit of kit today, albeit very, very old school. But soon after that, they stripped out the deck, and they really shifted some units and shifted some tapes when they started selling VCRs standalone, because of course they could just be jacked straight into any television at the time, because they just sat in between your antenna and TV. And of course dual tuners was still a thing, because you had the tuner in the VCR, which you used to tune into whatever channel you wanted to record. Then you had the tuner in your TV, which you used to tune into whatever channel you wanted to watch, which could be a totally different channel to the one you were recording, which is fascinating. So Betamax, when it came out, was a complete revolution. It wasn't the first home video format by any means. There were many formats that came and went before and after, but Betamax was the first one that you could truly probably say that captured the attention of people for recording television at home, which was a massive plus. It took away lots of restriction, and it allowed people to be much more flexible with their television watching. That is, of course, if they could afford it. This was a very, very expensive technology to buy into back in the day, and I think each tape was, each blank cassette at the beginning was around $16, I believe. Not sure about UK, it's hard to find UK information, but that is just crazy. And of course at the beginning they were all 1 hour tapes in the US, which is wild. So fast forward a little while with, you know, bubbling Betamax success, and then this guy came to really shake things up. Now apologies, this is a much newer sort of sell-through videotape. I should have found an older one, but I don't have my VHS collection down here, so this is going to have to do. The design stayed the same the whole time, of course, you know, the casing and stuff. But anyway, VHS came along, and I'm not going to bore you guys with the VHS versus Betamax of War, because A, loads of people know the story, and B, if you don't know the story, you can find out loads online simply by reading the Wikipedia article, for instance. It's a pretty good article and summary of the videotape war. They've got a specific article on the actual format war, which is really, really good and worth a read. So if you're interested, I'll link that in the video description down below. Now, just some of the basic points. At the very beginning, VHS could record longer from the TV onto blank cassette than Betamax, and that was a big thing. Not only was it a cheaper format, it could record longer, so in the consumer's eye that is a massive deal. Also, when pre-recorded tapes were around, when they started to come out and rental shops started to pop up all over the place, VHS was the format of choice for many different reasons. All of those reasons are detailed in the article, but one of the major reasons was A, it was cheaper, of course, but B, JVC licensed the technology to loads and loads of manufacturers. So the prices of the machines were driven down and down, and it was a lower quality system anyway, cheaper to produce and simpler. So ultimately this won out. And of course, you can't go through it without mentioning the porn aspect. VHS was notably the choice for porn over Betamax, which made a pretty huge difference to backroom video rental shop sales and profits, I guess, back in the day. But yeah, if you want the full story, then read the article. I can't retain all of the information, but VHS ultimately won out, and that is a tiny bit on Beta versus VHS. The rest of this video is going to be all about this as a format and my particular collecting and things. Well, even though I said I wasn't a collector, but you know, my own sort of small bit of collecting. So let's take a look at the tapes themselves. Now, I hadn't held one of these until I actually got my first tape with my VCR for my birthday, which is kind of crazy, really. That just goes to show, you know, I've been incredibly interested in retro formats and vintage tech for a long time, but the fact that I couldn't get my hands on this stuff until very recently shows how rare it is to come across in the wild in this country, which is just totally beyond me. But I'm so glad that I'm now introduced to it and in a little bit of a system where I can find these things for a good deal. So here is a tape, and it doesn't look that different from a VHS tape, but one of the main differences is the size. If I just put this here, you will see, firstly, it is a tiny bit thinner. It's not quite as thick. It is also a tiny bit shorter, but the most of the size difference is in the width of the tape here. It is quite a bit shorter in terms of width. So overall, it's a much more compact solution than VHS. And another thing about it is that I'd like to mention is this feels like a much higher quality. Again, the quality is generally, you know, considered Betamax the best quality in terms of the machines, the picture, and the tapes. Although the picture is kind of negligible when you fast forward a few years, because as there were revisions of the technology coming out, the picture was pretty much, you couldn't tell the difference. And even at the beginning, looking at the specifications on an average TV at the time, you would not have been able to tell the difference between VHS and Betamax quality, at least in my opinion, and a lot of people say the same. But anyway, this tape, it's kind of a light, very thin plastic, very sturdy. You know, it's very hard to break a VHS tape from throwing it around, but this is a much more quality feeling sort of solution, which I do like. And again, it's a compact little nugget of video, kind of just home video. I like it. I like the feel of the tape. Now, this is a Good example of a tape that has not been rewound. Surprisingly, when you buy second-hand tapes, I found, at least in my experience, that lots of them are rewound, which is kind of incredible considering most of the people that you buy these from no longer own a working Betamax VCR, so they can't even rewind them. So here's an example of a tape that has been rewound. So you can see a full spool there and a nearly empty spool there. Most of the film is on the take-up, of course. Now, talking of spools, let's flip these around. These do in fact have 2 spools, of course. And why am I mentioning this? Well, I'm mentioning this because during March of 2016, which to any Betamax fan is a month that will be remembered for the month that Sony stopped manufacture of blank Betamax tapes. Yes, that's right, they manufactured blank Betamax tapes up until March of 2016, which is crazy. They announced in late 2015 that they were going to stop manufacture, and they did in March of 2016. But anyway, the reason I'm mentioning these spools is because during that time an article came out. I can't even remember who wrote it, but whoever wrote it should not have ever been anywhere near this topic, because they were totally clueless. And he made a grave error in his article. He was throwing around loads of stupid remarks about why Sony was still manufacturing Betamax tapes, saying things like, so the only reason Sony were manufacturing them in this decade were for nostalgic reasons, they couldn't let go of the format, blah blah blah. The article was just a total heap of bull crap, basically, and if you're interested, I'll link that down below. But anyway, he said in his article that Betamax tapes used 1 spool, which I've seen noted in a couple of places now, which is intriguing to me because they have 2 spools, obviously. So I don't have a clue where that's come from, but in case anyone's watching this that thinks that these have 1 spool because you see 1 spool at the top here but you don't see the second one, that is not the case. There are 2 spools, as you can see. So yeah, I thought I'd mention that because a lot of tapes in this design, this is the general design, but some tapes have the label in the middle and it'll have like a half circle shape and you'll see both spools, which is quite interesting as well. But yeah, I do like this design. It looks pretty sweet. Again, I like the look of these tapes. So these are the tapes. Now let's take a look at the boxes. This is probably the most common size of Betamax box that you will find. This is referred to as a big box. This is a rental sized box, which is the same size as a VHS big box, regardless of the tape size. That is kind of an ongoing theme of this format, which is something that I found interesting when I first got into it 10 months ago. These big boxes are pretty much the ones to go for. They are just the nicest ones to own, in my opinion. I do have a few small boxes, but most of my tapes are big boxes. So here they are, and unlike later VHS tapes from the 90s and the noughties that a lot of my younger viewers will probably be familiar with, these boxes still have the little plastic pieces here that slot into the spools to hold the tape in place, which is nice. So as you can see, the box dwarfs the tape, which is kind of hilarious. This is a big box. They did come in smaller boxes, which I'll show in a minute, but this is an example of your basic pre-certificate Betamax release. This is obviously an X-Rental, and this one happens to be a stereo release, which is cool. We'll talk a little bit about sound later on, but that is what you'll most commonly see. You'll most commonly see it with a bit of damage around, you know, this is your average condition Betamax big box tape, which is very, very nice. This is Poltergeist, of course. The other most common size you will see is the smaller box. Now, here it is. Now, you may be thinking, hang on a second, that looks a little bit bigger than the tape itself, and you are correct. This is roughly the same size as a VHS case that we are all accustomed to. In fact, it is identical to a VHS case, as you guys can see. So even though the tapes are smaller, they kept kind of consistent with the case sizes, reminding me a little bit of GameCube games in a strange way. Although the discs were tiny, they still came in full-size DVD cases so that they would be displayed equally on shelves along with PS2 and Xbox games. This is kind of the same thing. They'd all look the same size on shelves, but as you can see, open it up, and of course the Betamax tape is smaller sitting in there. Now this one is a newer release. it doesn't work like post-certificate, small box, pre-certificate, big box. It just happens to be the small box that I'm demoing here has a certificate on it, a certificate of 18. But this is probably in a transition period because it's not even printed onto the cover. It's actually stuck on as a separate sticker. You can feel it and you can actually see it as well. Pre-certificate tapes tends to be a term that is thrown around a lot, especially on eBay. People seem to write it in their title a lot because the pre-certificate version of a film will be more sought after than the post-certificate because it's older and more original. However, you will find that lots and lots and lots of Betamax tapes are pre-certificate, and for me it doesn't really make a difference. I buy some pre, some post. I don't really mind. So small box, big box, that's a quick look at the cases. One more case design that I want to show you is from Warner Home Video. That particular video label used their own cases. A few popular video labels had their own cases, but Warner are some of the ones that stuck to their own case design kind of religiously. And it is a plastic... there is a name for this, completely forgotten it, but it's a sort of plastic squishy case that the tape sits into like that. I personally really like these cases. I think they look cool, I think they feel cool, and I do like the little inlay here with the sort of grooves that allow you to get the tape out very easily. But yeah, these are Warner cases, and as you can see I've got a couple of Warner films here. They are pretty much all like this. So it did depend on the video label as well. As you can see, a slight variation there inside, but still a little groove to put the tape. Now, check this out, folks. Here is something pretty cool. Now, it says here, please rewind film, which was of course stuck on by the rental shop, and you've got various stickers stuck all over this tape, rewind film and stuff. Now, a lot of collectors would get this and try and remove the stickers and restore this to as original condition as possible. But for me, I do the opposite. I like to preserve these stickers because these are part of history. I like to leave them in the exact same state in which I got them, because regardless of how tatty the stickers may look, they are part of the history of the tape. And rental shops, video rental shops, are something that has totally died, of course. And I do believe that keeping that little bit of history is something very, very cool. So that's a little look at the boxes. So in front of me here, I've kind of split up 3 films. I've given 3 examples of films that really show off the separation, at least in my mind, when it comes to looking at old films on tape. Now we've got stage 1, stage 2 and 3. Now we're going to work backwards. Number 3 is the least reason in which you'll want to collect for an old format like this. Now this is Blade Runner, which is of course an incredibly famous film, and just like any film that came out during the time that this format was popular, you can get your hands on it pretty much. So lots of early 80s films, early to mid 80s films, popular films, you can find them on Betamax. Because they're popular, they tend to command a higher price than other films, but because they're popular as well, they are available in all sorts of newer formats with much better picture, much better sound, and they aren't that special to get on the old format because they're around in so many newer ways and they're still watched by loads and loads of people because they're classics, they're brilliant films. Now, why do I have this for that reason? I am in a minority where I find it fascinating to watch an older film, an 80s film, on an 80s format. I like that. But because I am also a quality freak in terms of especially sound, I also own this film on newer formats, which I enjoy on newer formats for the sound and whatnot, because of course videotape does not lend itself to how Hollywood wanted the film to look and sound, because the technology is far inferior than even the cinema technology of the time in terms of sound and picture quality. So this is the least desired, in my eyes, the least desired reason for collecting, or the least desired category for collecting, but it commands the highest price but from time to time I treat myself to a popular release on Betamax, and especially Blade Runner is one of my favourite films of all time. Next up is the middle category, the middle of the road. This is House. This is a horror film that lots of people will probably have heard of. It's not necessarily a famous film, it's by no means a classic, but if you're into horror, then you'll have heard of House, because it's a decent horror film. This is the middle category because you're getting into the realms of possibly it's not released on a newer format, but it probably is. And it will be a decent price available on Betamax because it's kind of desired by some people and kind of not desired by some people. So this is the middle of the road format. You know, your average horrors that most horror fans will have heard of, or even some general people that aren't horror fans maybe will have heard of, aren't, you know, crazy hits and crazy classics, but somewhere in the middle of the road. Now, cool, that's that. I've got quite a few of these. But this is an example of where this format really shines. It's when you take a look at a cover, take a look at a title, you've never heard of it before in your life. No one you speak to has ever heard of it before. You buy it, you watch it, and it gives you an experience. This is where the magic is. So this film, Terror on the Menu, is also known as Terror House, and it's known under a couple of other different names. It's an incredibly small film. It does have an IMDb page, and it does have a little bit of a cult following, but not a lot of people have heard of this film, and it's a brilliantly funny and just awesomely I just don't know how to describe it. It's it's really something. It really is. I watched this a few days ago after buying it on an off chance for about £3 or something, and I am so glad I bought it. What a brilliant experience. And this is where, as I said, the format really shines. Taking a film that you've never heard of, giving it a go. And one of the best things is, in terms of video, folks, especially these cheaper films, the cover has nothing to do with the film, ever. It really doesn't. They are just generic covers that they have designed. The person that probably drew the cover, or designed it or whatever, never saw the film probably, and they have nothing to do with it. So this cover, again, example of a cover that has nothing to do with the film. But this, for me, is where the magic truly lies. Brilliant film, and not brilliant in terms of like Blade Runner standards, obviously, but I mean brilliant in terms of obscure videotape collecting. Going back to box sizes, this is something that I want to mention, which can be, if you've got a bit of OCD, this can be frustrating. If you want to collect for a series, here's Friday the 13th. Apologies, that should be there. These are the 3 films out of the 8 Friday the 13th films that are available on Betamax. First Friday the 13th being incredibly rare, and the last 2 being incredibly rare. But I am planning to try and find them all, because I found these 3, and I'm not going to stop here. I think it'll be a little bit of a fun kind of hunting, collecting experience to try and find all the Friday the 13th films on Betamax. Plus, I don't actually own them on any other format, so I think it'll be cool. But what I'm going to focus on here is how it can be annoying that even though these are 3 films from the same series, they're all on the same video label. This one is a small box, this one is a big box, this one is a big box, and I bet any money that there'll be another small box in the series. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you put them on a shelf like this, and I know for a fact that the copies of the first one that I've seen are big boxes, they will sit like this if you don't have all big box releases, which is kind of a pain in the ass, but it's okay. And again, it's just part of the overall experience. So by the way, pretty damn cool to find films like this on this format. This is again sort of Friday 13th, somewhere in between these 2 categories, somewhere in between. Before anyone gets confused, I'm not talking genre when I say categories. Again, I was referring to my own personal experiences of sort of different levels of films in which you can get on the format. Now, as you can see here from the frame, all of them are horror films, bar Blade Runner, I believe. And I believe I have about 3 or 4 Betamax films that are not horrors. Really, the kind of meat and potatoes of the stuff on this format is horrors, and it's the most fun stuff to collect for, because it can be seen as funny. It can be really, really fun when you've got people around and you want to do something a little bit different. But maybe some other genres of films from the time are a little more dated in a kind of boring way. And yeah, I'm not saying that horror is the only genre on the format. That's not what I'm saying. Of course, there's loads of genres, all sorts of crazy things out there. But for me and a lot of other people, horror is kind of like the main focus. Because it's just really, really good fun. And I'm not actually a massive horror film guru or anything. It's really this format in the last 10 months that has got me into watching a few more horrors, and I am thoroughly enjoying it. So folks, that is it. That is my video chatting about the kind of introduction and my little story with Betamax video and how much I'm enjoying it. It's good fun, and in the next video where we talk about my VCR, I'll delve into the technology a little bit more. And one thing that I didn't mention in the last part, which I forgot, was some tapes come in stereo, as you guys can see here. This is a stereo release, and other tapes can come with hi-fi sound. Do I have a hi-fi tape here? Yes, indeed I do. This particular Friday the 13th is in hi-fi, as you can see, because just like VHS, Beta got its own version of hi-fi. I believe it begun around 1983, 1984, but the machines were extremely expensive and hard to find. My machine is a mono Betamax VCR, and that is fine by me. In the future, I'd love to experiment with a hi-fi Betamax VCR and take a real listen to the soundtracks and compare the two directly, because with VHS it makes one hell of a colossal difference, and I guarantee the same is on this format, maybe even slightly better, who knows. But that's not something that I'm going to delve into for a very, very long time, because there is also something magical about that old mono kind of videotape sound as well, and it's something that I don't really experience a lot because I've got a hi-fi VHS VCR and most of my tapes are hi-fi. I don't own that many pre-cert VHS tapes that haven't got hi-fi soundtracks. Most of mine are sort of sell-through rubbish, which is not great from a collector's standpoint, but that they were my tapes when I was growing up, and that's what we had, so that's that. But anyway, here we have it, Betamax. Little bit of an introduction to something that I've been thoroughly enjoying, as I said. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and this little, few snippets of random information. Apologies that I couldn't delve into things in loads of detail, but if you want to check out the things that I've referred to in this video, head on into the video description. There'll be links to those articles there, as well as maybe a couple of other interesting things that I find along the way. Keep your eyes peeled for the next video where I take a look at my VCR. It won't necessarily be the next video on the channel, but it'll be the next video about Betamax. So, hope you all enjoyed. Please post a comment down below. Hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you in the next one.